According to UNICEF, around 214 million children globally, or 1 in 7 children, have missed more than 3/4 of their in person learning due to COVID 19 lockdowns. Digital tools can be game changers, but are they addressing the key priorities appropriately? For example, bridging the digital divide to accelerate digital learning in Malaysia. These are the kind of questions that we will explore in today's wrap-up panel session, which is entitled The Future of Education and Learning. Our first panelist is dialing in from Auckland, New Zealand. Professor Gayle Morris has been actively involved in teaching and learning development in higher education for over 20 years in Australia, Hong Kong, and New Zealand. Much of Professor Morris's current work focuses on leading the strategic direction in shaping the future of learning at Auckland University of Technology. Our second esteemed guest of this panel is the Southeast Asia Director for Beaconhouse, Malaysia. Today he is dialing in all the way from the UK. Alister Bartholomew has over 40 years of experience in education, and Alister has served in some of UK's most prestigious schools. Our third guest of the panel is from the conference's exclusive exhibit partner, Heriot-Watt University, Malaysia. Professor Dennis Wong is currently the Deputy Provost for Heriot-Watt University, Malaysia. Professor Dennis's research interests include statistical signal processing and pattern classification, machine condition monitoring, and VLSI design for digital signal processing. Our fourth guest of this panel is the youngest Malaysian to be named as one of the Forbes 30 Under 30 2021 honorees. Right after graduating Form 6, Yong, or he also goes by the name of Zero Ong, jumped straight into making his dream of the JomStudy app come true. After JomStudy was published, it gathered more than 10,000 downloads within 4 months of its launch. Lastly but not least, the panel moderator, Dr. Joyce Noza, is an expert associate partner in McKinsey and Company's People and Organizational Performance practice. Dr. Joyce has supported many GLCs and MNCs across Asia and in the US with the design and implementation of organizational initiatives including culture change strategy, change management, leadership alignment, and capability building to support large-scale transformation programs. This is definitely a great panel discussion packed with powerful personalities that you do not want to miss. So, Dr. Joyce?
Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Myra, for the introductions.
Hi, no worries. I'm excited to hear your panel, but before we start, I would just like to remind the audience that if you do have any questions for the panel, please do post it in the chat box or in the comment section below. All right, Dr. Joyce, whenever you and the panel are ready, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you again, Myra. Hello, everyone. As Myra had mentioned, my name is Joyce, and I'm very happy to be here to discuss our topic today: shaping next-gen academia and leaders through borderless classroom. The COVID-19 pandemic, we all know it's really disrupted our school systems around the world. The pace has been chaotic as systems have had to stand up remote learning overnight, plan whether and how to reopen schools amid changing circumstances, and support students academically and emotionally. In the scope of this challenge, it has left very little time for deeper reflection. However, crises like these often do create an opportunity for broader change. And as education systems begin to make decisions about investments for the new school year and beyond, it's important to step back and consider the longer-term imperative to create a better system for every learner. I'm extremely pleased to be here today with Professor Gayle, Alister, Professor Dennis, and Zero to share perspectives on this topic. Thank you again, all of you, for your time. We know this pandemic has had an extreme impact on next-gen academia in terms of collaboration, norms, pathways, teaching, and learning. Gayle, it'd be wonderful. Could you share some of your perspectives on the impact of this pandemic that you've seen on next-generation academia?
Yeah, thank you, Joyce, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel. Delighted to be here, and a very warm kia ora from New Zealand this evening. It's an interesting question because if you're talking about next generation academics, from my perspective, I've been preoccupied with the current academics and what they've needed in terms of support to do what they've needed to do over this last 18, 19 months. But there's a few signals. We know that we're working in environments of high flux with new modalities emerging. There's new models of teaching and assessment that are actually still being tested and refined as we kind of move through this next phase of the pandemic. I think what is certain is that digital and technology enhanced practices are here for the long term. But what is less clear, I think, is how individual universities are actually describing their practices and what new capabilities academics might need in order to thrive and ensure successful outcomes amongst their students. My sense is that the future workforce, if that's what we're talking about here, will be working with very different models of delivery, of learning design, and possibly even with emergent institutions, because we're seeing some interesting changes. So I do see a new model of academic emerging. I'm just not sure what that looks like yet.
Thank you for sharing. Dennis, how about from your side, what have you also seen in terms of the impact of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think from my end, I agree with what Gayle has been describing. So we always knew that the technology-enabled or online learning is the thing to do, and it will be the future of the mainstream higher education. However, the COVID has accelerated all the whole process, and now we can deliver online learning, but we are still learning how to do it right and how to give our students the best experience. And one thing that Gayle has mentioned is how do we actually assess students online as well. So this is something that for the past 18 months or so, universities across the world are actually learning from one another, sharing best practices in forum like this. And I think one of the other thing that we pick up is the mental well-being of academic staff and students is something that we need to put more emphasis on. It's something that we wanted to do pre-COVID, and now in the midst of COVID, it became really, really more important.
Yeah. Joyce, can I just follow up on Dennis, just that point about, I guess, the impact on current staff is, I think what we are seeing is a very fatigued workforce. This is a conversation that certainly I have with counterparts across Australasia, and we certainly know that as the impact of the pandemic continues to reverberate, this is only going to intensify. So it's very much front of mind, just the fatigue that is setting in amongst colleagues that are deeply committed to doing the very best for their students.
Thank you, Gayle. I agree. From what we've observed, we know that there's harm inflicted by this pandemic well beyond academics. I mean, there are students who aren't just losing academic learning. Some have lost family members, others have lost caregivers, or even caregivers have lost jobs and sources of income. And almost everyone's experiencing social isolation. I think, Dennis, you mentioned that, well-being. Can you speak a little bit more about what your organization or what you've seen from that angle and that perspective?
Yeah, so because we are a British university, so we are actually centrally coordinated through the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. So we are very much focusing in terms of building resilient communities. We really see in the past 18 months that students, like you say, Joyce, everybody is in a social isolation. And coming into an online setting like what we have today, often, people do not switch on the camera, people do not, they have been classmates for a year, but you don't really know how Alister looked like, or you do not know how Zero looked like at all. So what we've done is we actually try to instill the sense of purpose into students. So we have this small grouping of sessions that we gather everybody together. And the first thing that we say is you have to switch on the camera. So we are not continuing until you switch on the camera. And then before we start the actual agenda proper, we have a little checking exercise to say, how do you feel today? What's on your mind? And this kind of little thing that we share among each other, and really to build a sense of community among the students and staff as well. So we do practice this among our staff as well in the Malaysia campus at the very least.
That absolutely, I think that is really critical given the amount of hours we all spend online now.
Yeah.
And I would agree, both Gayle and Dennis, you both mentioned as well the importance of digital and technology. This is the future of learning, our ability to share best practices, and how can we really mitigate this fatigue workforce impact. Zero, a lot of your work is around digital technology, of course. Could you share, your perspective on, what does this mean for us in terms of technology being the future of learning, and how is this going to really shape our entire education system and how we approach learning?
Yep. Thank you so much for the question, Joyce. So in my opinion, from my perspective, I believe the future is digital. As what Professor Gayle and Professor Dennis has mentioned, we have a new model, a new framework that's coming out. So I'm talking basically more on towards Malaysia education system. And I believe in Malaysia itself, the first thing we have to tackle is providing internet coverage access to each and every family in the household in Malaysia, and also giving access to the family who can't afford devices for them to have the ability to afford a single device, so their children and the students are able to at least move on together in this new era of technology. And that's why I feel in talking about infrastructure, especially the remote areas in Malaysia, I believe we have to take some action initiative to help to increase the internet coverage. As you can see, last year we have cases where students had to climb on the trees to just take an examination. And there are my peers who live in remote areas have to just cycle or just come out from their what we call kampongs for like 2-3 kilometers just to attend classes. So I think in the future digital world, we have to tackle the first problem, which is internet coverage for every single individual, not just in popular dense area, but also in the remote area in Malaysia.
Great. Absolutely. It is something almost taken for granted in other areas of the world. And clearly for Malaysia, such a priority is about how do we get not only building the digital future, but really just talking about infrastructure and getting internet into the hands of all our learners. In the middle of July or the end of July, McKinsey did a study that showed that the impact of the pandemic really on just K through 12 student learning was just incredibly significant, which left nearly an average of 5 months behind in things like mathematics or several months behind the anticipated reading levels by the end of, say, a school year. And we've coined this term a little bit, unfinished learning, and what is that, what that impact will mean for children and learners long term. Alister, it'd be interesting if you could share, more about what unfinished learning means, and really what do you see is some of the impact of this on preschool, primary, secondary students?
Well, it's been a rather different position for us, I think, from universities, because I think some universities have assimilated to online and learning much, much better than schools could ever have done. In fact, some of them have embraced it readily and happily. And I can see that for them, I think it is very much the future. Whereas I think that as far as schools are concerned, the hybrid element of online will be important moving forward. But in the meantime, we have to really assess just how much these children have lost, and are very, very different in the term unfinished learning and learning loss, in that there are certain subject areas which have been handled quite well online, other areas of subjects where the loss has been really quite profound. So in my own schools, which are very much the mid-market in Malaysia, it has been very, very challenging, because we started off last March when we were locked down in a situation where some teachers were stuck remotely away from base, and there they were juggling their hand phones, trying to teach 4G on 4G to children who couldn't access their internet at home anyway, or they were sharing laptops with mum and dad. or no laptop. They were trying to access their learning with mum and dad who were using their phones. So we were in a very, very difficult situation. Now, things have improved dramatically, as you would expect, in the last 18 months, where people have got used to it, and we have tried to help our students invest in new technology and hardware to try and help them go forward. But the learning loss and the unfinished learning, as far as areas where children will need to catch up when we do get back, is actually quite profound. Mathematics, for example, as you were saying, is one of them. You have to understand what you're doing at any particular time, any particular area where you're under. And if you lose that, then you don't have any sort of sequential development for the children moving forward. And this is going to be a real problem. And when we look around the world, I'm currently in the UK, so good morning to you all from the UK on my short break from Malaysia. In the UK, I was watching a program on BBC last night that was actually just looking at the differential around the world in terms of the investment which is going to be needed in actually trying to deal with this unfinished learning that children have. And I have to say that the UK didn't fare very well in terms of the investment compared to, say, countries like America or elsewhere, where they have realized that the investment per child is actually substantial to try and get over this. Otherwise, there is no doubt in my own mind that we will be dealing with a generation of children that will be in catch-up for some considerable time, and some of them may never recover from this. And we would be dealing from a remedial point of view as they go into higher education. And that's where my colleagues here today will be dealing with that as the end product. So it's very, very serious. It's not something that we can take for granted. And the investment, as we perhaps begin to emerge and see some light at the end of the tunnel, is going to have to be a lot more extensive than is currently being planned.
Wow, it's very disheartening. It's clear there's going to be really significant ripple effects on the impact on our younger students, and literally the transition for them in terms of their chances of attending college and ultimately, fulfilling, reaching the point where they fulfill a job that enables them to support families. I want to turn back again to our discussion on the role in which technology can play to help mitigate this. Zero, you mentioned about internet infrastructure being one. Can you speak more also about just overall digital education and capability that's going to be needed once the infrastructure is in place? From what we've observed, it seems like Malaysia will also, and even around the world, will need beyond just internet connectivity. Can you talk about other digital capabilities that will also be needed?
Yeah, so apart from the infrastructure, we got to look into devices, I would say, as what Alister just mentioned. In the past, before the pandemic, you can have just one laptop for your household, for 3 of your children, for example. Everyone can take turns, they can do their assignments, their projects. But right now, in the pandemic, where everyone is having virtual classes, everyone has clashing timetables, one device is not going to be sufficient. So in part from the infrastructure, sufficient devices are also very crucial in the household, where you need to perhaps 2 or even more 3 laptops for each of your children to attend their classes and to perform their tasks. So in terms of going digital, we got to look into the capabilities of the family in order whether they're able to afford a device like this. And I think one of the way that we can look into is providing aids and assistance. That's what some of the organization, the NPOs, NGOs right here in Malaysia are doing. They're raising funds, they are supporting B40 families. And apart from just giving aid, we can't give aid forever. I would say we could probably conduct teaching on the parents on how to perhaps maximize their revenue in order to sustain this entire to emerge and introduce and to welcome this new era of technology for education, so they can actually sustain by not just depending on somebody else contribution, but also have their own potential and resources to buy their own devices. So I think that will be besides, apart from infrastructure, they'll be having sufficient devices for the children to learn in this new digital technology era.
It also seems, in addition to, say, family and households, not only acquiring these devices, learning to use them, but also from the other side, educators need to really expand their understanding of what it means to be kind of literate in this 21st century. Now it's about digital literacy. Gayle, could you share how then is the university handling kind of expanding that responsibility with staff and teachers and ensuring that they too are equally, digitally savvy to help run sessions for students online and so forth?
Yeah, it's again, like so many of these questions, there's a really, important areas for us to be reflecting on. I was going to come back to zero because I do think that the digital has some limitations, particularly within some of our specialized areas, our clinical programs, where there is a point that we need students in a much more embodied way, face-to-face, with patients, with each other. But that might be a further on conversation. But in terms of how we've supported staff, we moved very quickly at AUT to adopt a collaborative design process. There was a point last year, it was March, when we went into our first hard lockdown, working remotely and online, that we had, I think, 10 days to stand up 900 courses that could be delivered fully online. That was a massive undertaking. The only way we could do it was to partner with our academic colleagues, with my colleagues, to wrap around learning design, multimedia design, learning technologists, and to help triage their issues as they were moving to be able to kind of fully teach online. And that is a model that worked relatively well, but for some colleagues, that's a very steep learning curve. One of the things that I've reflected on is just also the challenge in supporting colleagues remotely who are already struggling with working and teaching remotely. It's a complex, there's a complex dynamic. And I think, we exercise maximum generosity with our colleagues and just try to kind of work through things methodically. But really, I think at the core was really adapting a collaborative approach alongside standing up, as many institutions have done, really good self-help, self-paced, instructional design resources, and opened up a number of kind of video professional learning opportunities, which were oversubscribed. So that's how we managed to do it under kind of pressure, but it's a model of kind of support that we've kind of stayed with throughout this last 18 months. I think teaching is sufficiently complex, and then you add the digital piece. We need a team working. It can't be left to be an individual academic's responsibility. I think you need everyone to lift everyone up.
Absolutely. It's really a new set of skill sets that's really, almost required, a new model of teaching and learning design, and being able to, transition from in-person teaching to digital. Dennis, have you also found that your faculty, teachers, and academia have been responding well to this new model? I assume many who go into academia never envisioned that they would be a teacher doing everything solely virtual.
Yeah, certainly. Again, I would like to really echo what Gayle was talking about. It is a partnership process between the professional services staff, the information services staff, the academic staff, and the students as well, because students are also learning for the first time. They need to transition into this online learning experience. So what we had is a similar process than Gayle, but we took it once at a time. We just tell everybody that it is a crisis situation. Let's work through this together. And we had the first 3 weeks. When it happened, is towards the end of our academic year. So we were fortunate following the Northern Hemisphere calendar. When COVID struck Malaysia, we are 3 weeks to exam, so we have very little to do. So we're providing podcasts, video summaries through PowerPoints or simple stuff. And through the summer, we created a new learning model, that learning paradigm, really. We call it responsive blended learning. And as a global university with campuses in UK, Dubai, and in Malaysia, we now say that, guys, you are now in global team. You teach together to the global cohorts. These are no longer Malaysia students. These are no longer Dubai students, but they are our students. So we introduced the concept of global classroom. We managed to share the teaching load out across the 3 different campuses. So for the same course, you do not have one person teaching it. You have 3 persons teaching at different locations. We share the marking loads because potentially, people in the UK will have more marking load, but equally they have, family members that require them to give caring expectation to. So in that sense, I actually helps to mark the UK students' scripts when we were in the final exam time. And we also have a lot of overseas students who were stuck in China, but they were actually, Edinburgh campus students. So rather than attending the classes in the Edinburgh time zone, they can now attend the Dubai time zone or the Malaysia time zone because it's essentially the same class, but taught at different locations with one coordinated approach. And with the pandemic situation fluctuating, we now see that, some places can fully be open fully out, and Malaysia is still closed down. So the responsive blended learning approach allow each instructor at different places to play with what they got at hand, but at the same time, the assessment as well as the learning outcomes are synchronized across different campuses. So it is a very challenging time, but I think like Gayle said, it's a partnership, and we really need this, need to empathize with each other. There will be a moment in time that one of the colleagues in Dubai may be, may suffer from COVID or may contract COVID, be diagnosed with COVID positive, and the guy in the UK or the guy in Malaysia need to jump in and say that, look, guy, we have your study, your learning, taken care of. Don't worry, he will. The academic staff will come back in 2 weeks' time after the quarantine and all sort of things. So yeah, definitely a partnership is the way to go.
It sounds really incredible. It takes a lot of coordination and a lot of planning on your part. You're running, being thoughtful about running multiple sessions, being considerate of even time zones, depending on where people are sheltering, across the world. I can foresee, I'm going to be a little provocative here. In my opinion, I would feel that maybe university level students can handle, the scheduling changes to some degree and manage that a little bit with given their maturity and so forth. But I'm going to challenge this to say, how then are our younger students able to cope with something like this? I mean, Alister, you've been a headmaster for years. You've worked with primary school students. Is this digital education really the way of that we're going to go? And how is this going to impact our young students who are, they're very resilient, I will agree. I've got young children on my side as well. But I will challenge, what does this digital education mean for our younger students?
Well, as I've said before, we will embrace the sort of hybrid part of it because there are things to be learned. But I'll be very honest with you, the vast majority of our parents, we're online again or going back as we have done in Malaysia on and off, it's just a giant groan. The whole thing is just, it's a huge pain for the parents because how do you deal with it? Now let's look at the very basic end. Now, as old as I look, I have 2 little boys who at the school, one of our Beaconhouse preschools in Kuala Lumpur. And it's been fascinating for me because I've been observing a lot of lessons. And of course, none of us, as a former teacher, none of us were trained to do this. Mm-hmm. But I've been watching, how do you approach a class of 3-year-olds online, and there's my little boy comes in, waves to his teacher and waves to his peer group, and they're all saying hello. And then he runs off, leaving the teacher there to win an Golden Globe Academy Award-winning performance for the next hour, singing and dancing and doing all sorts of wonderful things in a marvelously innovative way, entirely to herself, with the occasional child coming back in and waving again and hello and so on. And we are heavily invested in preschool education in Beaconhouse, and I just think it's remarkable that my colleagues have done such a wonderful job of innovation in trying to come up every day with something different, something really, really very special for these little people, to try and sort of embrace them and to try to catch their attention. But it is unbelievably difficult. Through primary education, it gets a little bit easier because the children are, what are they going to do? They don't have options. Preschool, you can drop out, maybe take some time out, whatever. But preschool education, it's all that's on offer, so you've got to be there. There is that element of discipline that the children understand because they've been in class, they've done that, and there's the teacher and so on. But the big challenge is, can you get them to turn their cameras on and keep their cameras on and stop dodging and weaving and stuff like this on? And when it gets to secondary level, oh, they're so much better than that. Please turn your camera on. Please listen to what we're doing. Please interact and so on. And then again, whereas in Malaysia, there is quite a lot, a background of teacher-centered learning and teachers that tend to want to talk and rote learning. And one of been my big challenges in the 20 years I've been around Southeast Asia, to try and get more interactivity. So to get interactivity online with children that are embracing the lesson, keeping their cameras on, talking to each other, getting the teacher to shut up and actually get the children to react and come in on that and so on. This has been the real day-to-day challenges. And, some of our teachers have actually adapted far better than others. Sometimes the one you would least expect have actually done a wonderful job of embracing these children online and making the very best of it. Others that perhaps feel a little bit camera shy, find it difficult. Wonderful teachers in the classroom, not so good online. So it's a whole mixture of different things. But to be honest, most of our parents can't wait to get the children back into school, because that's really what it's all about. And therefore, there will always be a limitation, I'm afraid, as to what can be done with online learning at school level.
Joyce, if I might come in there, just reflecting on Alister, I mean, of course, it plays out differently in terms of engagement with younger students, but I do think engagement has also been an issue within higher education. It's a point of, it's a virtual water cooler conversation, certainly across my networks, and very good teachers do struggle to engage their students in a virtual space, which they find much easier when they're running seminars or workshops or lab-based pracs or clinicals and so forth. So it is a challenge, and we have seen increases in, sadly, mental health and well-being issues are on the rise. Last year, we saw what we call did not complete. So the number of students not completing courses is starting to rise, which is troubling. And we're seeing lower pass rates. So those are all small signals to us that, particularly for our students who are already disadvantaged, our Maori students and our Pacifica students, they are being disproportionately impacted. So it's worrying as well, I think, within the higher education sector. And I think many of our students are also desperate to get back onto campus.
Thank you, Gayle, for sharing. Dennis, do you feel the same way?
Absolutely. Engagement is a very difficult thing, even during in-person teaching. I mean, the students can be sitting in front of you, but they may not be engaged. But the teaching online, just escalate that to another whole new level. So again, people like myself and Gayle, we've been trying to help staff to learn new tricks or learning new tools to help with student engagement. For example, you don't keep on talking for the whole session. You interweave your session with small quizzes or small games that students can do on the apps. Things that Zero is developing. So that kind of interaction will help. What we used to do is our digital classroom, enable the students to actually write on a whiteboard together. So it's very interesting when, do you have questions? The students sometimes do not like to ask questions, But if you ask them to type in the chat or ask them to write on the whiteboard, which they cannot be identified, they are very happy to do so. So this little kind of sharing of best practices is what we try to foster among the group academic staff that we have through either monthly or quarterly seminars among the staff.
Wow. I would agree with all of you. This is really an unprecedented time with new models for not only academia and teachers. It's also for the students themselves. How do we all encourage and ensure that students are staying engaged? Zero, I believe you're still also doing some continued studies now. Are there any personal tips you'd share for those listening in on how students can really stay a bit engaged and in such a learning environment? And are there any things that we can do to encourage, focus and attention when it's so challenging as it is?
Yeah, I actually agree with Professor Dennis when he mentioned Malaysia students, or in fact, just generally students. They don't switch on their camera. They like to pose questions when they are not identified, which I can really relate to it. Studying as one of the university student in Malaysia. I would say with my peers, I think it's more like I'm not sure whether it's a culture thing, because I have friends who study in overseas universities. They have this policy where, as what Professor Gayle mentioned, they have to switch on their cameras. Students have to switch on their cameras in order to participate in classes. But in Malaysia universities, I don't really see that happening. So perhaps it's more like a culture thing, or it's a policy thing. So when that's the first stage where you don't have to switch on your camera. So in fact, the engagement level is slightly lower, because if I don't have to switch on my camera, I can do anything behind the screen. So when if I'm not switching on my camera, I can do anything. So in terms of engagement on how we can be more in a session, I would say maybe the first step is to making sure the students have to switch on their camera in a compulsory way. I'm not sure whether my peers who are listening to this will hate me for this. This is just a suggestion in terms of how to let the classroom be more engaged and more interactive. And apart from that's the first step, switching on your camera. I would say my lecturers in my university are quite committed in terms they ask us to do group presentations every once in a while during classrooms, divide us into breakout rooms, utilizing all these Google Classroom functionalities, and divide us the breakout rooms, and we have to prepare for presentations. We have to present virtually. So I think that's a few of the ways we could see as a university student, I could see how we can engage with our lecturers.
Thanks, Zero. I'm going to check in with all your university professors to see if you're keeping your camera on now that encouraged that.
I'm struggling because second semester last year, I was teaching, I teach in second year design thinking practice. It's a studio-based course, and of course we moved online, and we're all about being present. You have to show up to the studio, you have to be there, and that means you need to be present and put your video on. And there were a couple of students who just refused to put their camera on, and afterwards when I followed up to have a chat with them, it was because they both had that separately, but they both had their pajamas on. And this was, of course, unknown to me. So it was completely understandable why you wouldn't want to put your camera on. But, they're human. And I think it's just about having that right mindset and setting the tone and expectations for students, but recognizing that, they're human too. I have a bad day when I'm in senior leadership meetings, and I sometimes turn my camera off because I just can't look at another face, or I haven't slept or whatever. And I think that's one of my learnings. It's just everybody's human. And so, but thank you for your comments. I really appreciated that.
Thanks, Gayle. I think we're probably all guilty of the times we want to shy away from camera. If we all loved being on camera, I'm sure we'd maybe be in a different business, maybe doing some films or television shows. So I think we can all be guilty of that at one point or another. But I agree, Gayle. We're all human, And while we can maybe force everyone to put their cameras on, it's really about getting people to want to put cameras on and want to engage with each other in this online virtual capacity. I'd love to just hear from each of you, if you wouldn't mind sharing. The last 2 years, certainly nearly 2 years, have been challenging, especially for myself. I know as a full-time working mother, love to hear what are some of your biggest personal lessons in your role, as an academic leader, and maybe Zero as, a leader in the digital space. Would love to hear what are your personal lessons, and maybe some of our listeners can take away that, we're all in this together. I'm sure they would probably appreciate hearing how we've overcome any of that, or what we've learned about ourselves or through this process. Alister, how about we start with you?
Well, I would like to think that I've always tried to be an empathetic leader, but this has been a game changer, hasn't it? I think certainly as far as school education is concerned, and we really do have to understand the insecurities and the needs of both children and staff in these very difficult times. And I think from that point of view, certainly the lesson for me has been that there is simply not enough time in the day to listen to how people feel, how children feel, how they react to this, and how we can compensate for that is very, very important. Obviously, my day-to-day work is very much to do with the staff. And it's been fascinating having these online panels. Some of our biggest schools, we're talking about a lot of staff in front of me, all in their little boxes, and trying to address their needs, and the little boxes all over the place. That's how we operate these days. That's the nearest thing we're going to get to a conference or a meeting, to try to reach out to each and every one of them as to what it is that I can do as the regional director group in terms of supporting their personal individual need, their insecurity, their training needs, their own personal perhaps challenges with IT provision or lack of it. And I think that's the most important thing, that actually people do sense that their leadership does care and does understand. That to me has been my biggest challenge, and I have sensed, certainly through my colleagues, and we employ an awful lot of people in our group, and to try to reach out and get to them at each level, and certainly a lot of my line managers who work with me. We have a 30+ strong office in our regional office, and to get them to reach out and to have lots and lots of discussions amongst ourselves about ways and means in which we can make a bit of a difference individually, and for that person to feel that difference. Because the last 18 months, 20 months, whatever it's been, has been a very lonely place for not only children and staff. They're very remote, and their feeling of being not in touch, not knowing quite what to do, not knowing how to take a different approach, and some of it has had to come off the conference call and go, individually online with them, with extra meetings, even at my level, to get to people individually. And certainly my line manager staff have been very, very good at that. So we've tried our best to understand, to be empathetic, to be sympathetic, and to really try to fulfill a role of support mechanism, to be that extra support mechanism for them where needed. Not easy.
Yeah, it sounds like almost more time dedicated to really tapping into individual needs and connecting with everyone. I would agree, it's so important that we all take the time to realize that everyone has their own set of challenges in this situation. Gayle, what have been some of your biggest learnings?
Oh, well, I could go tick, tick, tick to what Alister has just said, but I think, for me, I think, at least in the workplace, the biggest takeaway from last year, particularly with the working remotely, is just the importance of really, I think I've used this term already this evening, but just extending maximum generosity. One of the things I've learned is that, you know, with colleagues and students, everyone has a backstory. And COVID is touching people in different ways, and in some respects, unexpected ways. And I think that, you know, as Alister said, connecting, very deliberate checking in helps to unpack what that backstory is so that you're better able to kind of respond to needs when they emerge. But the second big learning for me professionally, because I have oversight of very large teams, I have a kind of staff-facing role, of which there's about 2,000 staff. The second thing is just to extend high trust. For me, maximum trust to my teams. I couldn't have done it any other way. And they've risen to the challenge multiple times. So those are the two sort of professional kind of takeaways for me.
That's amazing. It really takes a lot of strength and character to, you know, provide and give that kind of trust to teams. But in an environment as challenging as it is, it would almost be unproductive and unfeasible to try to micromanage everything. So really amazing effort there. Dennis, how about your learnings?
Yeah, without repeating what Alister and Gayle has already said, I think my personal biggest learning here is the realization of mental well-being. It's a really vital and very real issue for everyone, for myself, for my staff and my students, and my family as well. I mean, one way to help improving the situation is to try to make our work and our study more enjoyable. And personally, I believe that can only be done when we understand why are we here teaching, or why are we here learning something, or why are we in this role that we're working on, and that requires us to understand our own purpose and our, what is the reason why we wake up every day in the morning, and why do we love teaching? Why do we, pursuing a career as a actuary scientist, actuary or engineer or medical students? So I think those are the motivation factors that can help mental well-being. And I think this Wednesday is actually Are You OK Day in Australia, and I think that's probably a good day to remind ourselves about the importance of mental well-being, and try to reach out to somebody that you might have lost touch for a long time, and just ask them the question, are you okay? And that might just save a life.
Joyce, if I may come in here, what has been really quite humbling in some ways is that we have had a lovely feedback from many students, especially the older ones, where they're able to be a little bit more perhaps maybe empathetic themselves, but they have been very forgiving of their teachers who they know and love on a day-to-day basis in face-to-face classes, and then they see them online and they can see that some days some of these teachers are struggling. Yes, mental health problems are not just those in the domain of children, but also, of course, in our teachers as well. But they've been very complimentary about the efforts that their teachers are putting in. And they know that behind the scenes, in order to teach online, you have to be very prepared and a lot of background work being done. And it's Beaconhouse is fortunate. We're a very large group, and we have regular global conferences, one of which is the School of Tomorrow. And I had the pleasure of doing your job and moderating a meeting whereby we had children from Dubai and Pakistan and Malaysia and so on. And it was a lovely time to listen to all of these children talk about their online experiences with their teachers and what they had learned from it, and areas in which we could improve and so forth. But on the whole, I have been very pleased with the way that children across the age groups have actually been able to respond with a degree of understanding and sympathy, and a desire to want to make it work as well. I think that is very important within this, that everybody works together in what are very unusual, difficult circumstances to be able to make the very best of this. So there is a heartwarming element to this too.
Thanks, Alister. I would agree. I'd say definitely very heartwarming to at least witness even firsthand with my own children, watching them do online studies and really committing themselves to do their best and being very thankful to their instructors and their teachers for the efforts that go through. So I can see that firsthand, and it's great to hear that you're experiencing that as well and seeing that. It's wonderful. Zero, you are up. I'd love to hear as well on your lessons throughout this last 18 to 2 years of this pandemic crisis.
Yeah, so for me, it's slightly maybe different in terms of the academic perspective, but I would say the biggest personal lesson that I had was being adaptive. It's the biggest lesson for me. And I wouldn't say just me alone. I would say everyone in various different industries you're in, they probably learned the lesson of being adaptive because no one in this world could have predicted in the year 2020 we were hit by a pandemic, and no one could have predicted the future. So being adaptive is the only way, is the best way actually to prepare ourselves to whatever environment we are thrown into in the future, because we're living in 21st century. Everything is very fast paced, and in just bring a second, anything could happen. So I'll take the lesson would definitely be being adaptive.
Can we ask Joyce, can we ask Zero, are you being, your expertise in the technological side, are you being asked by governments, by ministries to advise as to what we can do to upgrade on this? I mean, we in our company are investing in things like Google Chromebooks and tablets to try and just give more and more children, more and more parents better access to technology. But I am very aware that in government schools, that it's been enormously difficult because there just simply isn't the hardware to be able to, and the internet capacity and access for children to be able to do this. I mean, at the very worst end, some of the children globally have not had any real academic contact now for 18 months. In some areas, it's been a total loss. And this is a huge worry for us, in terms of government investment. I mean, are you able to offer support and advice in that? Because this is so important, isn't it, moving forward?
Yeah. If talking about the government collaborations, in fact, actually, my app, which is JomStudy, we actually did contacted the Ministry of Education in Malaysia. We were asked, is there any collaboration that we could have? And our suggestion, maybe it wasn't really the best on the table, so that's why it was not. It doesn't go out as planned. But our goal, our mission for now is just to provide, not just affordable and also quality education to Malaysian government students. And the key point here is affordable, because the platform that I have right now is completely free. Regardless, doesn't matter your financial status, doesn't matter if your race, your religion, everyone can equal access to the application that I made. So I think that's my goal, to provide this platform as a free service to help the students. In terms of the infrastructure, Alister has mentioned, that's more towards the financial side. For our in terms of my application, we actually can't really find a way to somehow support by providing devices, this and that. But it's something that our initiative is to make sure our application it's a free platform for all students.
Thank you, Zero. I agree. It's COVID in so many ways is connecting us all in unexpected ways. We are, having to adjust our models of education from how we teach to how students are learning. I'd love to turn all of us towards thinking about how do we emerge from this pandemic, and what else, and I'll open it up to anyone to jump in here. What is going to be needed really to reimagine education systems for the long term? Given your role and thinking about what's going to be needed moving forward to become even distinctive in the next new normal?
If I may go first, Joyce, I think while giving the rest of the panel some thinking time, I think it's going to be an important thing for us to realize that moving forward, we cannot give up what we've already learned through COVID. So the advancement in terms of technology-enabled learning and all those that need to stay. But to me personally, beyond that, we need to really cultivate more values that we've learned from COVID. For example, empathy, the ability to be more resilient, the ability to be more adaptive back into the curriculum, because we do not know when the next pandemic will strike. It may come back in 5 years' time, maybe 10 years' time. But we need to make sure that our future leaders, our students, will be ready for this when they come back again. So I think it's important for the curriculum designer to, or the people in the ministry who design the national curriculum to understand that academic excellence is something that we cannot compromise. But equally important, we need to build into the students' personal qualities, qualities like self-awareness, qualities to be empathized with one another human being, the quality of being able to really connect with one another and work collaboratively with one another. Those are the quality that we need to, we usually do that outside the classroom, but there is increasingly, sign that we should bring it back into classroom, particularly in higher educations. I know we try to say that this is a primary school education, things that it's the responsibility of teachers at pre-university. But really, I think that no one should shake this off their shoulders and say that this is somebody else's job. It's every educator's job that we really foster these kind of qualities, the personal effectiveness that we want our students to be able to sustain for the next decade or even next century.
Thank you, Dennis.
Joyce, if I may just continue from Dennis, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your very good question directly, but I think at a more macro level, I completely agree with what Dennis is reflecting there. I think there's at least three things that we're going to have to get clarity around. I think one is, what is that landscape of emerging modalities going forward? I think most universities are grappling with that. High flex, high flux, hybrid. A focus is on the digital, but how does that dovetail with the physical? And what does that mean as we may continue to spiral in and out of cycles of having to work remote and being off campus? So I think there will be some new frameworks and approaches that will emerge and we'll get some clarity. I think the second one is then, what's the model of professional learning to really support colleagues in engaging with those new emerging modalities? And I third, which is always front of mind for me, is this question of maintaining quality teaching through very challenging times. We see increased casualization. We've got workforce planning issues. And so how do we hold on to quality teaching, academic standards? These are things that I think we need to get clarity around as we kind of move into whatever the next frontier is.
For us in schools, Joyce, it's going to be much more basic. We are going to have to compensate for the loss in the 3 R's, the reading, writing, arithmetic. And we've been frustrated by this because each and every time we've had these little opportunities to go back into school in Malaysia and then, lockdown again, we're already planning about how to claw back some holiday, how to adjust the timetable, the length of the school day. And it's going to be very, very important that we actually address that there is extra time given to them, especially for the younger children, to try and compensate for this loss. We won't, I'm afraid, I think, be able to do it over a short period. This is going to be a longer term goal. There's going to be some retrospective, I think, correctional areas and remedial areas needed where we're going to have to monitor this very carefully moving forward until we realize just what the loss of each individual children's needs have been. I think it's enormously complex challenge for us moving forward in education. I mean, we've met them before. Education is an evolving, obviously dynamic thing. But I do think we need to put our heads together. I think it's a global issue. I'm very happy and I'm very fortunate, having been in this game quite a long time, to have lots of colleagues internationally, and we share these challenges. We talk about it all the time, but we must not underestimate the need for compensatory education moving forward, and there may well have to be shorter holidays.
If I may add, my kind of answer would be more of a smaller scope in terms of just Malaysia, which is my forte. I would say it's, how we can rethink or rechange the education system in Malaysia itself is the shift on assessments, how we assess our students in government secondary schools. So in secondary school right now, we mainly assess through what we call an examination called SPM, which is a 1 month duration of examination. And the dependency on this examination is really high. And I feel like we could have, perhaps because of this COVID, we could take the model of what universities are applying right now, which is because of the pandemic, because of the virtual classes. I can see a lot of universities, instead of examination, they actually change it and convert it into assignment based, which I feel like it's very useful and beneficial. So in terms of the Malaysia education system, the government could have maybe shift from just 100% examination. We could shift maybe partial assignments and partial examination. Because in the future, when the endemic comes, when we start living with the virus, everyone starts going physically out there. We have to learn how to, ability to work with people, how to communicate with people, how to be the initiative one if you're working in a team, or even how to handle bad teammates. And I feel like all these qualities can only be learned through assignment based instead of just examination, because we're not tested on our memory skills. And so in terms of how we can prepare our Malaysian students in government schools, I feel like maybe the education system could change and shift, perhaps to assess our students through assignments apart from just exam based.
Thank you, everyone. I think the reality is that COVID will be here for a while, different strains all the time, and we need to figure out this complex challenge of how to reimagine the education sector. So I do hope all of you as academic leaders in this space will continue to share your learnings with each other so that together we can figure this complex challenge out. We're reaching our time. I wanted to thank you again, Professor Gayle, Alister, Professor Dennis, and Zero for your time today. From what you've shared, the cumulative effects of this pandemic will have a long-term impact on an entire generation of academia and students. And it's clear that all school systems are going to need to challenge themselves to reshape their models to deliver a better education to all learners. We know students are already several months behind academically, and they may actually struggle to reintegrate into traditional learning environments. So we will need your help as leaders to put in strategies in place to support these students as they make up unfinished learning and even work through broader issues like mental health and well-being and social reintegration. I think as higher education leaders, you also just face a complex situation, how to manage in this COVID-19 crisis. And I absolutely agree that digital tools and smart systems are going to play an integral role in our ability to reimagine this education system across for the long term. That then brings us to a close. Again, I wanted to thank Professor Gayle, Alister, and Professor Dennis and Zero for sharing your time and perspectives. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of you and getting the chance to collaborate on this discussion. On that note, I'll send it back to you, Myra.